This is our fifth video on the separation of nation and state for the Free Nations Forum. I'm Travis Henry, president of the Gottlieb Institute. And let's get this slideshow up. Here we go. All right. All right. In the previous video, we showed what each of the free nations of northwestern Russia would look like if they were culturally independent and if their cultural homelands, their historical homelands, freely overlapped with each other. So this next video, we're going to show how those same principles would apply to the existing nation states, the so-called civic nations, such as Poland and Finland. These are presently nation states. In other words, culture is fused with state. The national identity is identical with the governmental identity. But our whole raison d'etre, the reason for the Gottlieb Initiative, is to enact a future where those two spheres are separate from each other, similar to the separation of church and state. This is the separation of nation and state. So next up, we'll show what each of these bordering nation states would look like if their cultural homelands would overlap with each other. It would be such a healing and symbolic action, but not merely symbolic. So we're going to show Poland, Finland, and Sweden, at least. And they're already free to delineate a historical homeland. This concept was described by Guidon Gottlieb, the French political scientist from the University of Chicago. He laid this out back in 1994 in the widely respected Foreign Affairs Journal. If any of these nations had done this 20 years ago, so much sufferings would have been skipped and sidestepped. And we realized that some of these peoples, such as the Swedes, are kind of post-national. They're sort of postmodern, very progressive, which is great in some ways, but in other ways, it's this lack of differentiation between the nation and the state is still a structural wound, a harmful systemic wound that's crystallized in even the nicest nation states, even nice Sweden, nice Switzerland. These are still sick because they're fused with the nation and state. But if they would take this idea up, which is pretty simple, and show us how to do it, they would really be on the forefront of a better world, the likes of which we've never seen before. So first off, here's the Polish historical homeland. I took these maps from existing sources. This map shows the caption says the territorial changes of the Polish state in the course of its history. You see the pink is the present day Poland, and you see other boundaries, wider boundaries, show Poland at other eras of its history. And this largest boundary, I believe, is during the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Rzeczpospolita, if I pronounced it correctly. And this entire area right now, the Polish government could delineate this as their historical homeland. And better yet, the Polish government could divest all of its cultural assets, such as the Polish school system, the Polish university system, the Polish national park system, anything that's primarily of cultural purpose, and it's owned by the Polish government, its ownership would be divested to a Polish cultural trust, which we also call like a Polish National Cultural Organization, an NCO, which would be a non-governmental trust, which embodies the nation, the civic nation, and that would be the Polish nation with a capital N, and it could offer its services, since it's no longer attached to the state and no longer attached to police and military. This Polish nation would then be free to offer its cultural services, such as its school system and universities, to offer them across state lines, across the border. Now, for example, there are, say, ethno-linguistically Polish people of Polish ancestry in some surrounding border areas, I believe, and such as in northwestern Ukraine, um, southern Lithuania, or at least there were historically. And but besides that, besides the recent, besides the, let's say, ancestral villages, which may still exist on the just outside the borders of the Polish nation state. In any case, the Polish nation would be free to offer its school system and so forth to the Polish diaspora throughout Europe, throughout the world. And it would, its historical homeland, Poland, would delineate into basically cultural provinces, cultural voivodeships. And these would be not political, not state voivodeships. These would be cultural voivodeships, cultural provinces. It would cover this entire Polish Commonwealth area. And even outside of that, in Western Europe, North America, and so forth, where there are Polish immigrants, Poland would delineate cultural diaspora provinces, what they could call them by whatever name they wish, cultural districts, cultural diaspora provinces. But this would offer the voluntary Polish cultural offerings, such as Polish language immersion kindergartens, Polish language classes, could start to perhaps purchase homes that were owned by prominent Polish immigrants, Polish artists, Polish scientists from the past, and develop those as Polish heritage sites, just like it does within the current nation state boundaries, Polish heritage sites. And so that's a picture of what the restored Polish historical homeland would look like. Now, this Polish state boundaries would not change. They would be stable. This is not about some nation state military beast. It's about just embodying the cultural mythology in a healthy way, and then transforming the state, all states, into an anational, omnilingual state, which is really a human state where anyone if as long as you're a citizen of that state, no matter what language you speak, you have full 100% access to all governmental services, any sort of public interfaces. That doesn't necessarily apply in the same way in regards to, commercial businesses. That's a kind of a separate question. And it also doesn't apply to cultural sites such as, churches or mosques or synagogues. They would not be typically required to interface in every language, because those cultural sites, their purpose is to focus on a particular culture. For example, if there's a Russian Orthodox or a German, ancestral German Lutheran church, or German kindergarten, or a Russian kindergarten, or you could give any other examples, Czech kindergarten within the Polish state boundaries, they would not be required to force the Polish language or any other language, because it's a cultural initiative. Same with businesses, although that's as far as what languages businesses use in their signage and so forth. That's kind of a separate question. But the signage which is owned by governments, whether it be a municipal government, a county district government, a voivodeship province government, or the federal, the societal government. If it's signage or documents that's published by the government, it needs to be available in every language. Now the details, as far as, you can't, of course, you can't fit more than a few languages on say a street sign. But I believe we spoke about that in a previous video. If not, just to recap, yeah, the details are like um, um, interfacing with, let's say, a police officer or a government office, that would have like a dial a translator for every language in the world. Such services already exist. There could be machine translation, which might not have the force of legal perfection, but it could be a first step in making an omnilingual government. But as far as signage, we suggest that, like, let's say, every citizen in the country chooses their citizen language that they use. They want to use this language for interfacing with the political governance, and this government must meet that, as long as it's a real human language, and the person really does speak that. It's not just a joke. Oh, it's my language is Klingon. Maybe in the future, but not. We're not here. We're talking about serious things here, and so yeah, and that could change. A person could change their citizen's language, each year. I mean, if you it'd be unlikely to change, but you could change it. And then as far as signage, let's say the top, I don't know, 12 languages or top 3 languages need to be on all signage and all government signage. And then this signage would be required to be updated, let's say, every 12 years. In the Gottlieb Institute, we use the number 12 just as a fresh number, but it could be like every 10 years or whatever, every 5 years. Let's move on. So there's the Polish homeland. Let's move on to Belarus. Here is the original aspirations of Belarusia around World War I. And here is a Belarusian map that shows how the Belarusians identify also with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which the Belarusians often call, in their history books, they call it like the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Rus, and Samogitians. So it's a kind of different name for the same thing, but the Rus aspect, those are the Belarusians, and the Belarusian identity was really formed in, so it was sort of sponsored in a way, or arose through contact with the Lithuanian power, in a similar way that the Ukrainian identity arose through interactions with Austria and Poland. The Ukrainian was sort of partially sponsored by those nations, and the Russian identity per se arose partly through its experience of being a client state of the Mongolian Empire. So there are three different forces come from the Northwest, from the West, and from the East, which resulted in this common East Slavic identity, ancient East Slavic, ancient Rus, kind of evolving into 3 different nationalities, 3 different languages, who share a common root. But anyway, so Belarus identifies with this Lithuanian Grand Duchy as part of its history. Um, so Belarus could delineate Belarusian cultural oblasts or voblasts throughout throughout this vast area and offer the Belarusian school system and so forth. Here's Denmark. Now, where the Kingdom of Denmark separates nation and state, we always suggest, the Gottlieb Institute always suggests that where there's a monarchy, that really needs to be totally divested to the cultural sector, to the nation, the cultural nation. We're really, I know, Britain and Sweden and Denmark and Netherlands, Norway, they're very nice countries that, been very stable, relatively stable, and the monarchy has played a role in that. And the culture can be really lovely, like sort of a Harry Potter vibe. But and we're past that, really, when it comes to the political sector. Things, having the prime minister ceremonially bow to the king and so forth. It's that we're done with that. Okay, humanity is done with that. We're equals in the political sector, and we're also going to get rid of things like these ceremonial titles, like Your Honor and the Right Honorable Senator. That's baloney. We are the only right title in a true democratic state, a true right state, is the title citizen, the citizen. Every other title is a distraction in that sector. Now, in the cultural sector, divesting the Danish nation, the royal Danish nation, the king remain head of nation of that non-governmental cultural trust, and that NCO would be free to offer the Danish cultural services across across Europe, wherever there are Danish immigrants or anyone else who's interested in Danish culture. Who knows why people are interested in a particular culture? They don't have to, it's not just limited to persons of a particular ancestry, although that's natural that folks might be interested in that. So here's Denmark is one of the inheritors of the Kalmar Union. Sweden is also a co-inheritor of that era. Less so. Norway was more dominated, I believe, but it may be an inheritor too. According, that's up to Norway. That's up to their cultural leadership. But Denmark also used to include Norway, the Dane law, or the King Knut conquered England. It was part of Denmark. Down here, we see some of the short-lived Danish colonies in the Caribbean, in India, and in West Africa. Now, this is a touchy subject. This is not about neo-colonization. Anytime there's a restoration of the cultural homeland or cultural service area to include areas that used to be colonies, this is, it's touchy, and this is not this is not a cultural colonization. In any case, it is cultural. But what these are, restoring a Danish cultural presence, a voluntary cultural presence in these areas, would be focused entirely on, let's say, helping preserve architecture from that era. Also perhaps making amends by having that cultural presence there, which would fund local schools, and not necessarily just Danish national schools. And there could be, since hospitals and medical care are actually at their root, they're part of the cultural sector too, as part of science. These former colonial powers could also focus on, let's say, building hospitals that in those former areas. In any case, it's not about a political presence or a police or military return. That would be colonization. Um, but it's just a fact that Denmark had a presence in these areas, and this cultural presence can be a source of human connection, human amends, and a new relationship there. But I just want to say, likewise, all of the former, like the post-colonial states in Africa and Asia, um, the Pacific Islands, they are encouraged to also sort of quote unquote reverse colonize their former um, the states which used to, the European powers or other powers which used to rule them. Those newer nation states are welcome and to also offer their cultural services to in those um, European states. There's often a diaspora, for example, like the Caribbean um, immigrants to Britain. The various Caribbean nations, such as Jamaica and so forth, would be welcome to offer their national cultural services throughout Britain, and to even, if they wished, if it was meaningful to those nations, like Jamaica would be free to delineate Britain as part of the Jamaican cultural homeland. I don't. It might be a more fitting as a diaspora province, but every nation's free to delineate its historical homeland and its diaspora provinces however it wishes. It's no one else's business. So it's a totally two-way street. And anyway, the last map down here shows how Denmark used to include much of Estonia and the coast of Poland and so forth. Again, this would be restored as part of the Danish um, historical homeland. And on the upper right, I see that also Normandy is traditionally of Danish origin. At least one other story says that they were of Norwegian origin. So two different stories, but um, Denmark could draw or restore those Danish, Norman provinces as part of the Danish cultural inheritance. Here's Estonia. We only show a few little areas, bordering areas, which would be restored as the Estonian historical homeland. See areas to the southeast, and also a few border areas with Russia and Latvia. I mean, if there's some other concept that Estonian leadership sees as meaningful to Estonia, such as, let's say, an archaeological horizon which used to extend further afield, and Estonian, if Estonian historical textbooks identify as part of that archaeological culture, there'd be nothing stopping Estonia from drawing a wider homeland. But these maps are the only ones we have to show for this presentation. Finland, this is a bigger map. The Finnish historical homeland. On the map on the left shows areas which are Baltic Finnic speaking, including Estonia. If Finland included Estonia in its historical homeland, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that the Estonian national identity isn't recognized. It's not true. It just means that Finland also has a meaningful presence there and is free to offer Finnish cultural services. And then here's the Torna River Valley in northeastern Sweden, where there are Finnish speakers, Meänkieli, I believe they're called, and then the Kvens of the Finnmark in Norway, and then Karelia and Ingria, and the Kola Peninsula. These have a historical Finnish connection. And of course, the Finnish identity will freely overlap with the Free Karelian nation and with the Free Ingrian nation. And they're kind of different things. They have different focuses. They're three different um, national cultural organizations. They have three different centers. Also the Estonian. It's a different. They're related, but they're different organizations, and they could cooperate. They could all be, participate in a sort of Finno-Ugric cultural commonwealth or something like that. Um, and if they wanted to merge, they could, but there's no indications that typically that wouldn't be the case because all of these have their own identity and leadership. This map down here, it's unfortunately during the World War II, a Suur Suomi was the Great Finland idea, and that was dropped after Finland lost in World War II. This is not we're not a proponent, of course, of any sort of national statism, or like it's not a picture of the Finnish military taking over northern Russia, which is what the goal was in World War II. This is simply a at one time this was a meaningful cultural idea to offer Finnish culture throughout northwestern Russia, extending to through Arkhangelsk and the island of Novaya Zemlya and over to the Yamal Peninsula. We're in our presentation, we're intentionally hesitant of showing World War II era maps because of the understandable association with National Socialism. National Socialism was the deepest, densest, most wounded fusion of nation and state. The Gottlieb Initiative is really the opposite of that. Although we're dealing with sort of intense national cultural roots, the separation of nation and state, the separation of culture and military are really, it's like the opposite of National Socialism or fascism. It may seem to some people when they first see this like, oh, what is this? Like, look in this map of Great Finland. Is this some nationalistic? It's not nationalistic in any conventional sense of the word, because nationalistic always means it's a national statist. This is a cultural nationalism in a certain sense. It's probably not an ism. It's cultural nationhood. It's cultural nation health. It's a healthiness. It's a health. It's what it's a the healthy antidote to what happened in World War II, and it's a different antidote than just Americanism, which Americanism would just turn people into employees, and everyone just forget about national culture because they'd be too busy working long hours and watching television and eating McDonald's. Americanism, is like that. Russianism is a form of nation statism. It's a a totally different flavor than the National Socialism of Germany, but its intensity of culture and state and using the military to advance cultural territorial boundaries, that is a continuation of the woundedness of World War II. Now, Americanism is also fused. It's mostly an economic state where the national myths and the state are basically governed by wealth, commercial powers through lobbyists. It's a fusion of money and state. So neither of these are the good guy. Um, we are we do want to stop this Russian nation statism. We also want to put an end to American commercial statism. So we are something very different. And so let's move on. Here's Finnish historical homeland. Next, the Latvian historical homeland. Again, similar to Estonia, the maps available to us didn't show a huge difference between the present nation state borders. There's a few areas where Latvians existed or still exist across the border. There were a couple of Latvian colonies in West Africa, in Guinea, and also in the Caribbean, Tobago. When actually it was the Duchy of Courland, which is historically part of Latvia. Where we would encourage Latvia to restore a symbolic cultural presence there, to make amends or to protect, purchase Latvian cultural sites, such as buildings that were built during that era that still survive, and restore them, things like that. It's a nice thing. It's not any sort of economic state colonialism, military colonialism. Lithuania, it's also like Poland, like Belarus. It's an inheritor of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Rzeczpospolita. And here, not only would the World War I boundaries be restored as part of the cultural homeland, and also the various counties would be restored, but the entire Lithuanian Commonwealth. There'd be Lithuanian counties, cultural counties delineated throughout, extending all the way to the Black Sea. Now, this would overlap, of course, greatly overlap with the Polish historical homeland, and also with the Belarusian historical homeland, and Ukrainian and so forth. That's what historical homelands are supposed to do. Here's Sweden. Now, Sweden, like it's probably the most postmodern country. It's really gone into progressive statism as the motivating force in the country, which has a lot of good aspects. Yet, like I said earlier, things would get even better if the national identity would be fully differentiated from the state. And Swedes may be surprised at seeing these maps, but because the Swedes have not been focused on say, national cultural expansion. But here it is, the cultural restoration of the Swedish historical homeland, including Estonia, Livonia, Ingria, Karelia, Finland. It's also an inheritor of the Kalmar Union, including Norway, Denmark, and Greenland, Iceland. There were Swedish colonies in New Sweden, in what's now the state of Delaware and the Delaware River Valley in North America. There are, and maybe still are, Swedish colonies in the Caribbean. I think they're like Saint Barthélemy and Saint Eustatius. I'm not sure if those are Dutch or Swedish, but there were a couple of colonies, and there still may be. There was a Swedish colony in India and also along the West African coast. This is all part of the Swedish cultural space. If you want to get further deeper, Sweden, the kings of Sweden, have up until recently claimed to be the inheritors of the Goths too, the Gothic nation, the Gothic tribe, because Gotland, Götaland, is one of the historical provinces of Sweden, and even traditions say that the Goths came from that direction, and also the island of Gotland is part of Sweden. Those areas are all clearly associated with the Goths before the Goths crossed the Baltic Sea and went on a mighty trek across to Ukraine and down to the Bulgaria, Greece, took over Italy, the Ostrogothic kingdom, and the fall of the Roman Empire, and then ended up in southern France and Spain, the Visigothic kingdom. That's all could be considered part of the Swedish historical homeland. Of course, other nations also claim that heritage, like this. The Spanish kingdom also claims to be a direct descendant of the Goths, and so the Spanish cultural identity could also retroactively claim, like say, in a reverse direction. Spain could claim, oh, we're the inheritors of the Goths, so Italian Ostrogothia, the Balkan Ostrogoths, the territory of the Goths in around the Black Sea and all the way back through Poland and back into Scandinavia. That's all part of this Spanish cultural heritage. And we want to delineate Spanish cultural provinces there. They'd be free to do that. I mean, anyone is free to do that. The Danish kings also claimed Goths, king of the Goths, as one of their titles, I believe, because I think they contested the provinces of Götaland. But anyway, that seems very far afield, but this is the cultural identity and cultural interests need to be able to flow in an interesting way and a lively way, and not just be encased in these nation state boxes. Now the lower right, we included this map because this topic is on Russia, the free nations of Russia. The very word Rus, from which we get the name Russia, it in most traditions, that is considered to actually come from Swedish Vikings, who were the Rus, the Ruddermen, the Ruddersmen, the Rusman, came from the coast of Sweden, which is even today called Ruslagen, the law of the Rus people. So Sweden is encouraged to make a sort of alternative Swedish Rus identity. In the Viking times, all of Russia, or the Russia that was known at that time, was called Great Sweden. Svithjod Mikla, the Great Sweden, or Stora Svithjod in modern Swedish, Stora Svithjod. Again, this is just a cultural concept, which would have practical cultural fruits on the ground, such as offering Swedish schools and so forth. But the Russian cultural identity would be free to do the same in reverse and consider Sweden as part of the Russian historical homeland, or at least the Roslagen district. However, every nation's free to overlap however they want. Now, so we showed here what each of the bordering nation states, the border northwestern Russia, would look like if they delineated their historical homeland. Just want to reiterate, the state boundaries would not change. They would be stable. There is a way in the future, we propose something called a municipal plebiscite. We'll talk about that later. That's what this one video was about. Our next video is going to talk about another problem we see, or difficulty we see in the Free Nations Forum, and that's its conflict with the Free Russia Forum, which is another dissident group. So hope you join us for our next video. Thank you.